Hi everybody, TJ Mac Vintage Cards and Nostalgia here. I hope everybody's doing well today. It's been a couple weeks since my last video. I've been very busy with things and haven't even been on YouTube as much as I like to be, so I got some videos to catch up on. But it is good to be back. And in today's video, I'm going to show 3 cards and a set that I'm working on that have deep meaning to me and reflect who I am as a collector. But before I dive into today's topic, I want to take a moment to reflect on what it really means to evolve as a collector, because it ties into what I'm about to discuss. Now, I hear a lot, especially on various collector channels, about how people have evolved in their collecting journeys. Now, more often than not, this evolution seems to be defined by a shift from the familiar mainstream Topps or Bowman cards to rarer, harder to find items that can sometimes come with a heftier price tag. It's almost as if reaching that point in collecting is kind of a rite of passage, a symbol of experience and growth. In many ways, this is seen as earning what I like to think of as your hobby PhD, a sign that you've leveled up because you're getting into different types of issues. And don't get me wrong, I think there's value in this kind of progression. I enjoy seeing those collections come together and learning about the rare pieces that collectors pursue. But I also think that limiting the concept of evolution to simply moving away from seemingly common cards to rarer ones, it doesn't quite capture the full picture. YouTube makes it so that even some of the most rare cards may be seen more often than some of the more common cards. Now, true evolution as a collector, I believe, it's much more profound and dynamic. It's not just about what's more or less scarce or perfectly centered or has razor-sharp corners. It's about what resonates with you. The heart of evolution, in my eyes, is when your collection begins to tell the story of who you are. It reflects your memories, your values, and the things that you hold dear. Not just as a collector, but as a person. The cards you choose aren't just an investment of money, but investments of meaning. Now, even though I've been an adult collector for many years, I can honestly say that I'm in a constant state of evolution. Each card I add to my collection, no matter the price tag, it holds personal significance for me. Whether it's a card worth $30 or $300, there's a unique excitement that comes with it. In fact, I find myself drawn to cards in the $20 to $75 range just as much as I am to those that are several $100s. Now, I've learned a lot over time that what truly excites me about collecting, it isn't the monetary value. It's not the rarity or anything like that. It's the stories, the connection to the past, and the memories of the players and the teams. It's about reliving those moments and making those connections that tie me to a particular time or place. So I ask you, how do you think you've evolved as a collector? There's no right or wrong answer here, but I want to encourage all of us to think about evolution in a broader sense. It's more than just seeking rare items or building a collection of greater financial worth. It's about the deeper meaning behind it all. That's the real evolution. When your collection becomes a reflection of who you are and evolving within a hobby as something greater than the way it's commonly understood to many. It's when you build that collection that really suits you as a person. Let me take you back for a moment to a time when the game of baseball wasn't just a sport. It was a pure, almost magical experience. Before Ken Burns' baseball graced our screens in 1994, HBO gave us a glimpse into the past with When It Was a Game. This documentary was released in 1991, and it contained a treasure trove of color home movies capturing the essence of baseball from the late 1930s through the 1960s. It took us to a seemingly simpler time, a time when baseball didn't appear to be like a business, but more of a passion. The game wasn't about sponsorship or high salaries, but rather about competition, unity, and the charm of the sport itself. You could feel the love of the game in every frame, not just from the players, but from the fans, the ballparks, and the culture that surrounded it. One of the cards I want to share with you today takes me straight to that era. It's this 1950 Bowman card of Joe Gordon, the Hall of Fame second baseman who played from 1938 to 1950. Gordon got his start with the Yankees on those great championship teams of the 30s. And even though he is in a Cleveland Indians uniform, it brings me back to my favorite moment in the When It Was a Game documentary that has always stuck with me. Tommy Henrich, who was a member of the 1938 Yankees, spoke about that team's business-like approach to the game and how manager Joe McCarthy called on Joe Gordon. I want to show you this short clip.
The 1938 Yankees were the type of team that came out every day to beat you. And that's the way McCarthy wanted his ball players to act. He wanted professionalism out of his ball players. Somebody was saying, McCarthy, you like Joe Gordon, don't you? He says, I sure do. He says, why do you like him? He says, I'll show you why. Hey, Joe, come over here. He says, what's your batting average? Gordon says, I don't know. So what's your fielding average? He says, I don't know. Okay, Joe. And he walks away and McCarthy says, that's what I like. All he does is come to beat you. Okay? Multiply that by 9. That's a tough outfit to beat.
When I look at that Joe Gordon card, I think of that interview, and I'm transported back to a time when baseball wasn't about personal achievement, but about the collective strength of a team. It's a time that the documentary captured so beautifully, a time that lives in the corners of these old cards. To those who don't collect, they might not understand how something as simple as a 75-year-old piece of cardboard can make the past feel so real. Now let me show you a card that has even more personal meaning to me. It's a 1982 Topps Pete Rose. And this card, it's more than just a piece of memorabilia. It's a bridge to memories of my grandma. I spent many summers mowing her lawn, and it was a job that always came with a reward. There would be an ice-cold Pepsi waiting for me when I finished. And my grandma, who was in her late 80s at the time, would sit there in the lawn chair, basking in the warmth of the day, and we'd sit and we'd chat for a while. Now, the stories she'd tell were familiar, often the same ones over and over again. But that really didn't matter. To her, those memories were treasures, and they gave her comfort. And sometimes she'd insist that I would take $20 for helping her out. And it was at that time I was working on my run of key Topps cards from 1956 to 1989. And around that time I was specifically focused on the 1982 Topps baseball set. So I picked up this Pete Rose card with that $20. And every time I look at this sharp image of Charlie Hustle, eyes locked on the batter as he readies himself at first base, I think of my grandma, those hot summer days, and the sound of her voice. and the stories that still echo in my heart. Now, she passed away at 99 and has been gone for 12 years now, but this card keeps those memories alive. Next, I have this 1979 O-Pee-Chee Guy Lafleur. Now, this card takes me straight back to the late 70s and early 80s. It was a time when things weren't always easy, but there was magic in the moments. And my parents weren't wealthy, but we sure got by and didn't really want for much. My dad worked as a boiler operator at Hooker Chemical, and my mom worked part-time at a department store. And one day in late 1979, I remember my dad coming home with an Atari 2600 video game system. It cost about $180 back then, which is the equivalent of about $790 today. Now, that was a crazy amount of money for us to spend at that time on a video game system. But my mom and dad must have thought it was worth it, or they wouldn't have done it. Now, the Atari games were pretty simple, the graphics were very basic, but some of those games could be downright addictive. One of our favorites was Activision Hockey, which came out in the early 80s. And the graphics were fairly basic. You'd have a goalie and one forward on each team, but the thrill of the game was real. Every time my dad's team scored, he'd shout, "Lafleur, Lafleur." You see, Guy Lafleur was the biggest star in hockey, in between Bobby Orr and Wayne Gretzky. He'd won a couple MVPs, and every time I look at this card, I hear my dad's voice saying, "Lafleur, Lafleur," every time that puck would go in the net. And I remember those days spent in front of the TV and playing hockey with him and my brother. And these are memories I hold dear, and this card is a reminder of those priceless times. Finally, I want to share something special. Something my oldest son and I have been working on for nearly 9 years. It's this 1960 Fleer baseball great set. Now, this is more than just a collection. It's more than just cards to us. It's a bridge to a memory I shared on my channel a few years ago. A memory I have from my early teens. It was a summer day, and my friend Jim and I were tossing a baseball back and forth in front of his house, and there was an older man sitting on his small concrete porch. He had white hair, glasses, khaki pants, and a white polo shirt with green stripes. And he was casually flipping through a photo album, one page at a time. And we kept throwing the ball, minding our own business, when suddenly the man gestured for us to come over. And we walked towards him, a little bit curious, and he invited us to stand on either side of him. As he thumbed through the pages of the album, I was just stunned to see what was inside. It was filled with tobacco cards, which I know now were T206 cards. And at that time, I was a collector just like every other boy in 1989, but I knew little about tobacco cards. But there it was, a Ty Cobb, which that name I recognized, and a Joe Tinker, whose last name just stood out to me because it sounded a little bit strange. The man, he wasn't proud of the cards because of their value, you could tell. He was proud because of what they represented, the memories they held. He explained how those cards had lived in his father's basement, how his dad would pull them out of packs of cigarettes and stick them to his toolbox and onto the walls of his workshop. He had grown up with these cards. They're part of his childhood. And decades later, as he flipped through that album, I could see his mind drifting back to those simple days spent with his dad. Now, at the time, I didn't fully understand how significant that moment was, but over the years, the weight of it has hit me. I now realize that the true value of those cards, it certainly wasn't in the scarcity or anything like that. It was in the stories they held, in the personal connection, the memories tied to each one. And so I find the same connection in my own collecting journey with my son. We're working on this 1960 Fleer set, and every time I look at those cards with their blue and green and red and yellow photo corners, it reminds me of that summer day, of that moment when I learned what collecting really was about. And after 9 years, we've only gathered 37 of the 78 cards in this set. We're not rushing through it. I get them a few every year, and we're just savoring the process. And as we add to our collection, we're not concerned with how much the cards are worth or how quickly we can finish the set. I'll be honest with you, I may never live to see it completed, and that's perfectly fine. We're focused on the memories we're creating together, on the stories that will one day live in those cards. To me, true evolution in collecting isn't about moving to more valuable or rare items. It's about moving towards truly what matters to you. It's about the personal connections, the stories that shape your journey, and the memories that make your collection meaningful. That, to me, is the real evolution. I hope everybody has a great day.